And in this next one, these two guys are going to finally finish their business with Brian Ortega and Diego Lopes locking horns. And hopefully this one finally happens, man. I mean, the first time Ortega stepped in really short notice, he was trying to make 45s. I think he knew there was no chance of that. He made 55. And then the fight ended up not happening. So I just feel like he stepped up on short notice thinking that he could have saved the card. I think that for some reason at that time he had a goal to give money to a church or whatever he was thinking, and he just pushed his luck a little too hard for that fight, and I feel like he probably just wasn't ready to perform. So hopefully this time, he's tuned up and ready to go, and I expect him to be, because this is a pivotal fight for him, man. I feel like after that whole fight week debacle last time, if he comes out here, lays an egg, there's going to be a lot of question marks regarding Brian Ortega's future, if the UFC even thinks he wants to still continue to fight and keep him around, which they obviously will not cut him or anything, but just it would be a bad look if he comes out here and lays an egg after people are kind of conversing about his potential motivation to continue fighting, and just how infrequently he's been fighting lately. But Diego Lopes, I mean, this guy stepped up less than 24 hours notice, fought Dan Ige, and man, it was an awesome fight. Ige was able to come back in round 3 and win the round, which is crazy for a guy that took the fight the same day that it was going down. And Diego Lopes was able to move up to 165 pounds when he was preparing for a 145-pound fight a completely random opponent, and still get the victory. So Diego Lopes showed a lot there as well. But this is definitely a different level of opponent with Brian Ortega. Looking at Brian Ortega, I mean, this guy, he does have the one injury loss to Yair, which he rectified in his last fight by proving that he was the better fighter and finishing Yair. And outside of that, there's only 2 losses at featherweight and in general, or to Max Holloway and Alexander Volkanovski, 2 all-time greats. So we're talking about a guy that's beaten legends and only lost to the absolute cream of the crop, whereas Diego Lopes, he's been incredibly impressive in his run. He's gotten some really amazing quick finishes, dangerous dude, but obviously he doesn't have the pedigree of an Ortega, and this is his chance to build his name off of Ortega and move into that top upper echelon and kind of prove that he's ready for that next level. And I think that featherweight's been kind of logjam for a long time until more recently when Ilya took the belt, and it would be good for the UFC for Lopes to get this win and kind of become a contender, but I still think there's a lot of question marks, and I feel like Ortega is definitely a big live underdog to get this victory here. I mean, when you're looking at it from a fight perspective, I think early on Lopes, he's going to be the faster, more dynamic guy, and Lopes likes to counter, with big punches. He has power and speed, nice uppercuts, and good straights. But if he can't get Ortega out of there early, which has been an impossible task thus far in his career, I think that the stand-up will become very competitive because Ortega is going to be pressuring forward. Ortega has the better boxing, the better cardio. If they're in the pocket, Ortega is going to be, in my opinion, a little bit sharper early on, where Lopes can be dynamic and land those big 1-2 strike combinations with speed. He's going to be maybe getting to the spot first and more dynamic than Ortega. But I feel like as the fight goes on, if Ortega can keep that pressure on Lopes, we saw Lopes in his last fight, for instance, with Dan Ige, get kind of roughed up in round 3. And Brian Ortega is that round 3 king, man. He works his way into the fight. When he starts to see you slowing down, he'll pick up the pace. Big, huge featherweight for the weight class, so Lopes doesn't have that big advantage in terms of size, which he usually has over the majority of fighters. And Ortega endures, he has the cardio, and kind of breaks you late with his finishing ability. And man, I mean, until I see Ortega go out there and just totally look done to me, I'm going to back him here in this spot. I feel like he looks solid against Yair. He did get almost finished early, and there's going to be potential for Lopes to club and sub, which would be very impressive, or knock out Ortega, which would also be impressive. But I think if he can't get him out of there early, I feel like Ortega's going to work his way into the fight with this pressure, with this body lock game. He'll be able to win, I think, the third round, especially just off cardio and experience alone. And Lopes is one of these guys where he tends to slow down and he will give in and kind of concede rounds or defeat. And Ortega's the complete opposite. I think he's a total absolute dog, and I feel like that's a factor in this fight, just the mentality of both fighters. I think that Lopes is a little bit more breakable, and Ortega, I think he's going to be able to compete fine on top, which is something that a lot of fighters, they don't have that confidence against Diego Lopes, because I do feel like Diego Lopes's defensive wrestling isn't necessarily that great. That's why I do think that Ortega could take him down, even though Ortega isn't an elite wrestler in his own right. I think he'll be able to take Lopes down, and instead of other opponents having the fear of Lopes submitting them, I don't think Ortega's going to have that same fear. I think that he's going to take down Diego Lopes, have the confidence to hold him down, control him on the mat, maybe even advance into more dominant positions and get the finish himself, especially if Lopes starts to fatigue. So I'm actually going to predict Ortega gets a sixth third round finish in the UFC, and